So now the heart by cardiac looping has reached the shape of the human adult heart. So now the next is that the formation of the heart chambers. And how are the chambers formed? It's by the development of the septa and the valves. So we know we have we have four major septa, that is the atrioventricular septa, then the interatrial septa, interventricular septa, and we have the articopulmonary. This is the articopulmonary septa. These are the four major septa, and we have two sets of valves, that is the atrioventricular valves, that is the tricuspid valve on the right hand side of the heart, and the bicuspid valve between the left atria and the left ventricle, and then we have the semilunar valves in the aorta and the pulmonary trunk, that's separating it from the ventricles. So first we learn about the development of the septa. So development of the septa, the mechanism, the general mechanism is what we will mention first. So the septa, it's developed from the endocardial cushions. Okay, we hear the term everywhere, that is the endocardial cushions. So the endocardial cushions, either they can arise, the first scenario is that they can arise from both the walls. Okay, there can be two masses of these endocardial cushions which are growing towards each other, and they fuse to form a septa, and they fuse to form a septa. The second scenario is that there is only, see over here there's two growing mass, over here there's only one growing mass, and it'll grow downwards to fuse with the opposite wall and the opposite side. And an example for this is the septum primum, which I will mention later. The septum primum. And the third mechanism is that there is no endocardial cushion, but rather what happens is that the walls are growing. Okay, so if you see in these three successive images, the walls, they are growing, and because of that, because these walls are growing, there's an excess in the medial portion. So this medial portion, they elongate, they grow because of the growth of the adjacent walls, because of the growth of the adjacent walls, even the medial portion, it grows and it fuses to form a septa. But this septa, it will never fuse with the opposite wall, or it will not completely fuse with the opposite wall, opposite side or something, and there'll always be a space. So that is the third mechanism. So now this endocardial cushion, how it is formed. Okay, so we told about the mechanism. Now the endocardial cushion, it can there are two mechanisms, two major way of origin. So one way is that the extracellular matrix, it proliferates, and then the endocardium which is lining over here the extracellular matrix has increased, and it proliferates and increases in amount, and then the endocardial cells, the endocardial lining which is lining this extracellular matrix, that will proliferate and grow, and it will disperse into the extracellular matrix and fill it. Okay, so that is one way of origin, that is from the endocardial cushions, from the endocardium itself. And the second way is from the neural crest cells. So these are the two ways the cushions can origin, and it varies from each septa, and which I will explain later when the respective portion comes. I will explain it. Okay, so first we will talk about the atrioventricular septum. So first it is the atrioventricular septum. So the atrioventricular septum, we have so this is the common atrioventricular canal. Okay, so we know that the atria and the ventricle, in the primitive atria and the primitive ventricle, this is the primitive atria and this is the primitive ventricle, they are continuous with each other. So we have a common atrioventricular canal. What happens is that on the dorsal, on the ventral and the dorsal, on the dorsal and the ventral aspect, or the anterior and the posterior walls, there will be the development of the endocardial cushions. Okay, the endocardial cushion will develop, and also on the lateral walls, okay, on the respective, the right and the left side also. So two pairs of cushions they develop. So the lateral cushions, they remain as such, and they have a role in the development of the valves, about which I'll mention later. But the endocardial cushion, the superior or the inferior, or the anterior and the posterior wall cushions, they will fuse together to form the this is the atrioventricular septum. And this atrioventricular septum, it divides the common atrioventricular canal into a right atrioventricular canal and the left atrioventricular canal. Okay, so this is the same picture. So the ventral and the dorsal AV cushions, they will fuse together to form the atrioventricular septum, and this one is a longitudinal section. Okay, longitudinal section, we can see that the atria and the ventricle, okay, they're continuous with, there's the right side and the left side it is created. Okay, so that's the development of the atrioventricular septum. Okay, next we are going to discuss about the development of the interatrial septum. Okay, and this is quite interesting and very important also. So the interatrial septum is formed by so we have, this is the common atrial chamber, okay, and this is the atrioventricular septum, or it's also known as the septum intermedium. So what happens is that in the roof of common atrial chamber, the roof of the common atrial chamber, there will be an outgrowth. Okay, an endocardial cushion, it develops, and there will be an outgrowth, and that's the formation of the septum primum. And this outgrowth, this projection is known as septum primum. And how do we locate it? Okay, how do we describe the location? It develops to the left side. Okay, this is the so this is the left and this is the right. Okay, so it develops to the right side, sorry, it develops to the left side, it develops to the left side of septum spurium and the sinoatrial orifice. Sinoatrial orifice is the opening of sinus venosus. Okay, so sinoatrial orifice is the opening of sinus venosus into the common atrial chamber. So it the septum primum, it develops to the left hand side of this opening. Okay, and the septum primum, it continues to grow downwards towards the septum intermedium. It continues to grow downwards, and what forms over here, the space between them, it is known as the foramen primum. Okay, foramen primum. And then foramen primum. So we have the septum primum, which grows to the left hand side of the septum spurium and the sinoatrial orifice. It continues to grow downwards, and it does not touch the septum intermedium yet. And before that, that space over there, it's known as a foramen primum. Then the septum primum, it continues to grow. It continued to grow, and then it fuses with the septum intermedium. So when it fuses with the septum intermedium, at that time itself, there will be degeneration. Okay, there will be the degeneration. There will be the degeneration of the septum primum close to the roof, and that's what forms the close to the roof. There will be the degeneration of the septum primum, and that's what forms the foramen secundum. Okay, so the septum primum, it grew downwards to fuse with the septum intermedium, and then there will be degeneration in the portion close to the atrial roof, and that's what that space is known as the foramen secundum. At the same time, there will be the development of septum secundum. Okay, I know it's a lot of terms, don't get confused. So we have the septum primum, then foramen primum. So we have the septum primum, then there was a development of the foramen primum, then because of the it fuses with the septum intermedium, the septum primum fuses with the septum intermedium, then there's the, because of the degeneration or in the close to the roof, there's a formation of the foramen secundum. secundum, and then simultaneously to the right side of the septum primum, there's a development of the septum secundum. So in between the sinoatrial orifice, and this thing, there's a development of the septum secundum, and the septum secundum, it continues to grow downwards so that it closes, or it not closes, it covers the foramen secundum. Okay, so it forms a shield. Okay, it shield in front of the foramen secundum to form the foramen ovale. Okay, and this what is formed, it is so then this portion of the septum primum, it becomes the valve of the foramen ovale. So what is the importance of the foramen ovale in the fetal circulation is that we know that from the placenta, the blood, it reaches the right atrium. Okay, it reaches the right atrium, and then from the right atrium it goes to the left atrium, and then from the left atrium to the left ventricle, and then through the aorta it goes to the through the systemic circulation. So there is a right to left shunt, that is during the fetal life, there's a right to left shunt is present. So the blood, it flows only from right to left. It can never come back because the septum primum is quite sturdy, so it cannot flow back. Okay, so it can only from right to left the shunt can be there. From left to right the blood won't flow because the septum primum is quite sturdy. So what happens once the child is born? Okay, once the lungs start functioning, okay, so once the lungs start functioning, there will be flow of blood into the left atria through the pulmonary vein. There will be flow into the left atria, and what happens is that because of the pressure, the septum primum will fuse with the septum secundum. Okay, they will come in contact, and there'll be the fusion, and there'll be the closure. Okay, there'll be closure of the foramen ovale. Okay, there'll be closure of the foramen ovale. So then what happens, closure of the foramen ovale once the lungs start functioning. So what this septum primum, okay, the septum primum that's seen in the adult or in the after birth, the septum primum, it becomes the septum primum, it becomes the fossa ovalis, and the remnants of the septum secundum becomes limbus of fossa ovalis. Okay, and which is seen in the adult heart. So so that's what happens. So now what is the clinical significance? Okay, now the clinical scenarios, that's what we're going to discuss now. The clinical scenarios or the clinical or the defects that can occur. So we told the whole process. Okay, so there is a development of the septum primum from the roof, then there's a we can see the foramen primum, then because of the degeneration of the portion near the roof of the septum primum, there's a formation of the foramen secundum. Then there's the development of the septum secundum close to the right hand side of the septum primum, and then it grows just enough to close the foramen secundum to form the foramen ovale, and that plays a very important role in the fetal circulation in establishing a right to left shunt. So what are the clinical scenarios is that one is that primum defect is that we said that septum primum, it will fuse. Okay, it will fuse with the septum intermedium, and when that does not occur, okay, it does not fuse, that time the foramen primum remains open. Okay, that is the septum primum defect. Okay, the second defect is the septum secundum defect. Okay, that is when the septum secundum, we said the septum secundum will grow long enough to cover the foramen secundum, so it becomes a foramen ovale. So there can be two scenarios, that is the septum secundum, it won't grow enough. Okay, it won't grow enough so that the foramen secundum, it will remain open. Okay, and the second scenario is that the degeneration. Okay, the degeneration of the septum primum, so this degeneration is too much, it goes down, very down. The degeneration of the septum primum is too much, degeneration is too much, much that the septum secundum is unable to close the foramen secundum, and it will remain open. So that's the defect in the septum secundum. The third one it is the patency of foramen ovale. Okay, sometimes we can see that long after birth also. I said the foramen ovale, it closes after birth when the pulmonary circulation is established to the heart. That's when the foramen ovale it closes. So what happens even after that, there will be a physiological closure, that is functionally there wouldn't be, the shunt would not be present, but anatomically that foramen ovale it remains open. So functionally or physiologically, functionally closed, okay, but anatomically, okay, we can see that opening, okay, anatomically it's open, okay. So that is the patency of the foramen ovale, and often known as probe patency, okay, probe patency, because we can send a probe through it for the evaluation of the heart. We can send a probe through this foramen ovale. So next one, it is the premature, okay, premature closure of foramen ovale. Okay, so what happens in the premature closure is that I said only when the baby is born, okay, after the lung circulation is established, only then the foramen ovale closes. But if it closes ahead in the intrauterine life itself, that time what happens is that the right to left shunt will not occur, and there will be hypertrophy of right side of the heart, and the left side will be underdeveloped. So that's what happens in the premature closure of the foramen ovale. Now the fifth condition, okay, so we discussed two conditions related to each of the septum primum and septum secundum, and two conditions related to the foramen ovale. And the fifth one, it is the cor triloculare biventriculare. Okay, so from the name itself, it's quite evident what this condition. Cor means heart, triloculare means three chambered, and biventriculare means two ventricles. Okay, so what happens, what's the defect in this condition is that the interatrial septum is not at all found. Okay, it's completely absent. So that's what leads to a three-chambered heart, or the cor triloculare biventriculare. So next, what we are going to discuss is about so now I had mentioned the sinoatrial orifice. Okay, so now what we're going to discuss is the fate of the sinus venosus.